Start. One is on, yeah. Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening here in Providence, Brown, and welcome to everyone online who's watching. We are absolutely delighted at the Watson Center, thanks to Ashu and Stephanie and Grace, to be able to organize this event. We're going to very quickly listen to TM Krishna. And just a brief introduction before we get Krishna to talk. So there are, the way I'd like to think about Krishna is that there are three TM Krishnas. One, of course, is the, a great musician, performer, Carnatic music vocalist, who's probably now at the peak of his powers, and to listen to him, of course, is an absolute joy, and that's the TM Krishna that you all should be knowing in any case. The second TM Krishna we saw yesterday here in Brown, what I call Krishna, the artist as communicator, which is that, this amazing ability to talk about and explain both, the art and the magic of performance, which, we heard about yesterday, but also, the theory of music, its social, historical construction, and in a way that really allows all of us a little bit more access to the music itself, in a way that, outsiders maybe don't really comprehend in all its kind of great glory and magnificence. So yesterday we had the Krishna, the artist as communicator. Today we have the third Krishna, which is the artist as public conscience. Just a small story not to be taken amiss. My mother is a great fan of TM Krishna, family, friends and everything. Krishna's aunt and my mother were friends for 75 years and neighbors, actually. And what she says kind of epitomizes how, upper caste Tamil society thinks of TM Krishna. She says, Arvinda, genius, but one screw loose here. And that's kind of the way she...
We're making it extremely public.
Exactly. I know you won't mind, Krishna. The thing is that, and that's kind of, in his role as public conscience, I think he's generated a lot of awareness, discussion, sometimes even controversy. And of course, I think there are two kinds of dimensions to his public conscience. One he's been doing for a long time, which is of course the how to democratize the art form, how to bring more hitherto marginalized communities both into the listening and into the production of music, and that's one aspect. I think the second aspect of his public conscience is I guess what's been happening more recently, which is, and the way I like to maybe present it, Krishna, is the following. So by self-referentially talking about something that I myself wrote in a review of an MS Subbulakshmi book that I did. And this is this, classic, the many ideas of India. One, the syncretic idea of India, which maybe is more where Hindustani music is a little bit more kind of an exposition of that. And of course, the more Hindu, religious and devotional music of Carnatic music. And what I kind of say in this review is that ideally these two ideas of India should not have to compete. They should happily coexist. Ideally, the typical household in India would rise at dawn to MS Subbulakshmi's music of collective piety and find solace at dusk in the secular interiority of an Amir Khan Khayal. What an India that would be. Alas, how that India year by year recedes before us, not just as quotidian reality, but even as imagined possibility. And I guess it's that second dimension of the ideas of India, which I think Krishna has become very active in kind of championing one idea and resisting other ideas of India. So with that by way of background, let me hand over to you, Krishna. Sorry for the screw loose thing. That's just a joke. But I think the way we should do it is maybe you speak for about 30, 35 minutes, and then we'll take questions. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Arvind. Thank you very much, and thank you, Ashutosh, for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. Yes, I did. It's on 1. Is that okay? Okay. Well, before even I address the 2 words on the theme, art and activist, there's one question that probably many artists are asking, why should an artist ask these questions? Right? And I just thought I was going to start with that, and then I said, no, I should ask this question. Should an artist ask this question, or should even the receiver, ponder about this, Because art is there to be given, it's an experience, and whatever you derive from the experience is it. Why do we need to mull over it? Why do we need to, within quotes, intellectualize it? Shouldn't we just let it happen? It's a fair call if all art is just happening. But art is never just happening. Art is a very conscious act. And therefore, it is always being constructed within a certain environment, a certain situation. And the participation in art is also choreographed by society. It is not something that, it's not a flat piece of land on which art happens just because you derive what you may call an elevating experience, if you so receive it. Therefore, even if you're just a practicing musician, I think we have to sometimes step back and ask this very difficult question, which is, what is art? All of us have a feeling about art. We all know what is art, but we always struggle to figure out, can we articulate it? Can we actually say what it is? Can you say this is art and this is not art? At one discussion many years ago, I remember, I was proposing a definition, and a young man in the hall came and told me, there are ants near my house, and they walk in this beautiful way, and once they leave this design. That is art. So this association with design or form and prettiness as being art is one of our first stumbling blocks. Is art anything that you find attractive or that appeals to you? Maybe that's a better way to put it. Is that art? Or, for example, all of us doodle in our classroom. Is that art? It's an interesting question because it could be something that you do. So we have to explore this question before we think of what an artist is doing. Now, if you ask me what is art, first I would very strongly propound the point that art is a conscious act. It is not an accidental happening. And art is never about how pretty it is or how beautiful it is. Even if you think something is ugly or you don't like it, it can still be art. So what does art actually do? First of all, it's dangerous to give a overarching definition for art forms because each art form probably has a different function. We'll come to that too. But if you look at the entirety of art, why did the Homo sapiens species construct something called art? Right from the cave paintings, if you want to ask this question. The one thing that you notice, even from the oldest drawings or scribblings, is art is not a literal representation of what the person saw. You could argue that the initial cave paintings were markers for where you could find food, where you could hunt. Of course it was. But was the deer on that marking the real deer? Or was it the idea of the deer? And I think that's where something different is happening vis-a-vis art. What is this idea of deer, and why do we need an idea of deer or idea of whatever we're hunting? The important aspect that every art does, it abstracts the experience of life, but it's not the literality of life. So the idea of abstracting something is, I think, where art straight away comes into play. So when you see a deer being painted, It's not about it being exactly the deer. It's about what was the experience of that deer that the person is having. Oscar Wilde said something interesting in one of his essays. He said, we all say art copies nature. He said, no, nature copies art. It's a very interesting observation. The first time I read it, I was like, what is he talking about? And if you just probe that statement a bit more, it's very interesting. So suppose you're sitting outside your house every day having a cup of tea. And you are looking around, you are seeing things. Then your daughter or son comes one day, sits with you, and then draws what he, she, they see. And suddenly in that painting or sketch, there is a frog. You have never seen the frog before. But the next morning, when you go and sit there, you see the frog. You never saw the frog before. The frog was always there, probably. I think that's what he's pointing to. That when he says nature is copying art, he's trying to say that artists allow you to see things that you never see before. And you can extend it to feel things that you don't feel before. And essentially, this is what abstraction does. And abstraction is a very simple thing to understand in many ways. It's also a very difficult thing to experience. If I was going to simplify what is abstraction in art, if I was going to tap the table, this is the event. But the idea of tapping the table is the abstraction of this event. And if the idea can exist beyond the event, that's what you're doing. You're abstracting something. So whether it is music, whether it is dance, whether it is painting, this is what we're essentially doing in art. We abstract life experiences, and in that abstraction we get interpretation. Having said that, can we say all art is the same? Is all art the same? So I'd like to introduce the word intentionality here. I think every art form comes out of social constructions, and the intentionality changes according to the social construction. The two musical forms that I find fascinating is political music and religious music. And they are so similar, it's not even funny. All over the globe, political music and religious music in form, I'm not talking about in structure, are similar. Because they do the same thing. All political songs and all religious songs will in tune be repetitive tunes. Okay? The rhythm will be always catchy that you can pick onto. And they will be always focused on certain words. Whether it is a word of protest or putting up the red flag, or whether it is about some god, or Jesus, Allah, or Rama, whoever it is. So the construction of the form itself determines or the intention determines the structure of the form, right? So every musical form and every form of art has intentionality behind it, which also determines what is abstracted, how it is abstracted, and to what extent it is abstracted. So if we think of purpose, does art have a purpose? I think there will be diversity in the idea of purpose, and we can't, shall we say, put it all together in one purpose. But all of them essentially are taking the idea of abstraction in different channels and avenues. And let me just reflect on my own life a bit in this context. I started learning music when I was about 6 years old. And until I was 23, I was probably not thinking about this question or any of these questions. I was singing concerts, extremely pleasurable experience. I had a lot of people coming to my concerts. I was touring, etc., etc. So why did I start asking these questions? Maybe is also an important point to bring in here at this juncture. For me, at some point, I had cracked what a performance was. I knew how to be, within quotes, a great artist. I knew how to make people happy. I knew how to do it in different scenarios. But then I was asking myself, and I loved it. Like I was telling Arvind yesterday, I had no great, a day of saying, oh my God, I'm bored of doing this. No way, I loved it every day. I would have done this for 30 years of my life. But the question that suddenly emerged in my mind is this is all art is all about. I know what I'm going to do, and the audience actually also knows what I'm going to do. Right? We both know what's going to happen. Yes, skill is a different thing. You bring skill in and you can do things that you've not done before, but that's skill. That's a little thing in life. But then essentially we are both having this transaction. Now it defines two things. If you are having a comfortable transaction for a long time, then we are similar people. Otherwise there would have been some flux somewhere. There was no flux. So one thing was defined as we are similar people, having the same transaction and very happy about the transaction. At some point that bothered me. I was saying, if this is all art is, goodness gracious, for 40 years of my life, am I going to do this? And the only way an artist will think of, shall we say, improving, is to probably expanding the number of compositions I know, maybe having another set of, developing another skill set, ticking another box. Well, after a point, that's a no-brainer. You should be able to do it, otherwise you won't be doing music, right? So that's when actually my journey in this entire questioning actually went into musicology. And I said, okay, I want to know where these ragas come from. And I want to know what this tradition is all about, which I'm supposed to be carrying forward very proudly. And everybody thought that I was this classicist who is that generation's classical star. So I was really bothered about, okay, what am I really carrying forward? Is it like, so I started with the help of scholars reading old treatises, etc., etc. And then this, why I brought this up is because something I addressed even yesterday is, when you learn an art form, you also learn a certain notion of beauty in that art form. You also, the only way you know to reflect on every other form of beauty is through this notion of beauty, which means you actually don't receive any other form of beauty. You don't know how to receive. Of course, you can argue that that's how human beings function. Fair enough. We always have data, and based on that data, we are reflecting on other data. Or to put it evolutionary, we are pattern seekers. We are pattern recognizers. We are always going to have patterns on which we figure out another pattern, right? But when we are only looking at another pattern based on a pattern we know, are we actually seeing that pattern? It's a very interesting, philosophical, aesthetic question. And I think we are not. This is probably true of every other conversation regarding race, gender, color, everything else. It's exactly the same conversation in some manner, right? So I very soon realized that what I realized in my own musicology research was even what I thought was beauty within this incredibly great art form, which of course we think is the best in the world, beauty was not constant. And it was stylistic. It is not about I don't like this style. No. The fundamental notions of beauty crumble in front of my face. And that was a startling day. Because I believe that this complex art form, all words which are very disturbing, but I'll still use them, has this unified notion of beauty that is there for whatever thousands of years or hundreds of years or whatever, and it's been passed on, and this precious thing is in my hand, and I'm taking this forward. But suddenly I realized, no. I probably would hate the way the original composer sang the song with the years I have today. Right? So then the questions, so the whole notion of what is beauty even within one mode of art itself needs investigation. And then we go to this basic construction. Is there anything fundamental about an art form? Does every art form have a fundamental structure of forms that make it an art form? Because you could just say there's nothing. So let me tell you what I think is my art form in a very fundamental sense. And something I've been saying, I think Indian raga music, if you want to use that term, has only three fundamental elements. Raga, a melodic idea. Tala, or slash laya, I like that term better. But tala because it's the construction of laya in some manner. And the third being text. Everything we do in music is a relationship between these three elements. It's almost an adjustment between these three elements that determine which is dominant and which is not dominant, which gives way to another. Whether it is improvisational or whether it's compositional, these are the three elements. So you have to have an understanding of what raga is, you have to understanding of what tala and laya is, you need to have an understanding of what text is. And text could be semantic, could be non-semantic. That too. Everything else is built around this by the context of society and time. Everything else. So the moment I've got to this frame that I felt works for me in an understanding, then everything else that I was thinking the art form is not. It is not that. So then what is my concert? What am I doing in my concert? What is the message I'm sending? So when we discuss the purpose of art, there is this very convenient term that many people use, art for art's sake. And I only ask one question. I'm willing to accept that. But if you don't define art, then what sake is it? So it's art for art's sake if you have a concept of what art is. But if you allow art to be some detached being floating somewhere, then that's a cop-out. That's an escapism to not relating to your own reality, right? So art for art's sake is a platitude that artists use that should not be used, because unless we understand why we are doing this. Now, going on in this journey, there were other issues that cropped up. The moment I'm discussing beauty, this is not beautiful, or this is not sung, or this is not done, the question was also about who is defining these things, and when was it defined by whom? And what are the definitions we have lost, and why have we lost them? And that means we are discussing people and human beings. And human beings do what human beings do, which is we play with power. And often we play with aesthetic power. And something that we very rarely discuss is the power of aesthetics and the oppression through aesthetics. We rarely discuss it. We discuss everything else. So that is how I think my own transition happened with regard to understanding what art is and what the functionality of art is in society. Now, before I get to activism, there is no art that doesn't have meaning or that is not passing a social message. So we have to first accept that. When it's not saying something, it is saying something. Always. So when I go to a concert and I say, look, one of the technical terms used for many art forms is also art music, which I've used for long and now I'm a little iffy about it. But I sometimes still throw it in. I don't know when I'll discard it, but right now I'm in the in-between. But saying that art music has no social role. It's about just the art. But what do you mean by no social role? You're singing to people and you're receiving it among people. There is a social role. You're saying something about this. You're saying something about who can listen to it. You're saying something about who is not listening to it. You're saying something about what boxes the person needs to tick to be able to have access to this. Everything is being decided. So, for example, Carnatic music in its content, as Arvind already indicated, is Hindu religious music, but to be more specific, it's the Brahminical idea of the Hindu that we sing about. So, we are saying something by just uttering those words. We are saying something about the words we do not utter. So let me give you two examples of some work that I did in terms of, shall we say, questioning this, of what we can utter and what we can't utter. Because that will give you an inclination of how it is possible to question this. So one of the people I collaborate with is wonderful writer Perumal Murugan, who some of you may have heard of. Is a fabulous writer who, of course, was badgered and had to pretty much stop writing for about a year. And we've been working together to try and see, can we have different kinds of conversations in Carnatic music? And in a way ask this question about what is not sung about, or what is not uttered in the raga, for example. And one of the songs that we worked on for about a year and a half with great difficulty was on the idea of manual scavenging, which is still rampant in India. And the first line of that song, I will tell you the line, I'll translate it, was Nara Malam Allalama. Simply means, can we pick up stinking feces? That's what it means. And I remember the first time I was going to sing it, and Murugan came and sat next to me in the audience, and he said, actually I have to tell you something. So I said, what? He said, that first line? I said, yeah. The word was slightly different, but I was not sure you will be comfortable singing it. So I said, oh really, what is the word? So he said the word was Nara P.A. Allalama. Now, anybody who knows Tamil will know P is shit, Malam is feces. There's a huge difference between the two. And he said, I was not sure whether you'll be, and Malam is more Sanskritized. P is direct Tamil. And that also there's a politics there, right? And so, if you go into Tamil Nadu, they'll say, P poitya. Or even worse, they'll say, Kakkus poitya, actually. Okay? Now, when he said P, I said, yeah, sure, I'll sing. I said, why did you change it? So he said, I'll figure out something. I was just getting on stage. That's the first time singing that song in my life. And it's a song we worked on for 1.5 years because we struggled with this idea of what is our positionality in that song? How can we write this song? What's the tonality of the song? So Murugan and I had gone back and forth on this song for a long time. I still remember one of the toughest songs to work on. So I get on stage, and I must tell you, I sang it, but I was so uncomfortable singing it. I was singing it, but every time I would say P, there's something going on in me which is great discomfort. But when I sing Malam, there was no problem. It was like saying Pushpa or something, right, which is far more comfortable to say. Or Kamalam. For example, Malam, Kamalam works, right? It could be even Yati there. So I'm like thinking, my God. And so why I'm pointing to this is other notion that how we experience something and how we think of something are so many times disconnected. So the politics cannot just be in an intellectual understanding of something. What about the experiential understanding of that? It took me months of singing it again and again to get to a point where it didn't matter. But it took me a long time. So why I brought this up is, when I sing this song, what am I doing? Is this activism? Well, I don't know, we'll come to that word, but is this activism, or is this just another way of saying we can have another conversation, can be another way of abstracting another life experience and saying, can multiple life experiences exist in Raga Bhairavi? Right? So, one of the struggles that I had, and I continue to have, I think, is to find that way of experiencing these different things and not just understanding it in my head or in the work that I do. Now to the second word, because I hinted about activism. It's almost become like a portfolio now. I mean, I must say that unfortunately, even my name is sometimes followed by author, singer, activist. I'm always like uncomfortable. It's like a job title in some ways, right? Is it a job title? I mean, is an activist a job? Is it something that only some people do? I just think that activism is just good citizenry at some level. I mean, I don't think it is a separate thing by itself or a separate title that you take. And in a way, art by itself is activisty. It may not be the kind of activism you like. Suppose I only sing about a certain race all my life. That's activism. I am saying something through that. I am telling people I am creating a club. I am creating a certain political conversation. Now, if you're going to think activism was only a progressive idea, then we are at a different point of conversation. But it is not. Activism can be extremely damaging, right? We should remember that it can be very parochial. It can be very, very casteist, racist, all kinds of things. So, I don't see myself a separation between an artist and an activist, or a citizen and an activist in many ways, right? But has my music, has the artist in me changed? Because, within quote, the progressive activist in me is now vocal. That's also an interesting question to ask. People have asked me this question many times, saying that you're more an activist now than an artist. I'm like wondering, okay, what is that person saying? The person is actually saying is, you were never asking difficult questions through your music before. You're unfortunately doing it now. Don't do it. Is what that person is actually telling me. So there is also a problem on how we perceive. We have reduced art to be just a pleasurable experience. Pleasure of all kinds, including divinity. That's also a pleasure. It may be an intense pleasure, but it's still a pleasure. So reducing art to that has separated it from a fundamental aspect, which is about imagination, creativity, and allowing you to experience things that you don't experience in direct contact. The thing that art can do is it can slip things through even before you know it's been slipped through. That many times direct relationships cannot do. And therefore, in its very essence, art is an actionable thing. A question of activism, a question of participating in something. Now, as an activist, so when I sing a concert, sometimes there is this issue that does crop up in my head. So I go to a concert to sing. And I know sometimes in my head I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to sing today? And sometimes there's this compulsive disorder of wanting to do something that, say, pokes something. That's also a problem. Because then I'm presuming that in just singing a raga, I can't move something. That is sometimes a trap too, in which I have to recognize. That in this overt need, overt energy to, shall we say, create contrast, create contestation, which is what we do, sometimes we are forcing that upon the process of art creation. And we sometimes forget that only maybe singing something by itself can also be an item of questioning. Sometimes there are artists in the past who may have even done it without them realizing that they've done it. They wouldn't have even known they're doing it, right? So it is, I think, personally for me, something that I'm always conscious of, saying, I'm going to sing. If this comes up, it comes up. If it doesn't come up, it doesn't come up. But the fact that you are taking art to be something that makes people uncomfortable is enough for it to flow. In fact, my first act of activism, if you want, in art, was entirely internal to Carnatic music. It had nothing to do with the larger politics of India or the larger idea of India, nothing. It was just got to do with what does it mean to perform. So it is about 2004 or 5. And there is a performative organization that we have for a concert. A Carnatic concert has certain rules by which it begins. So the opening, the middle, and the end, as we call it, right? And all of us know whether it's a talk, whether it is a concert, what the opening should be, what the middle should be, and what the end should be. Every one of them we plan according to the same design, right? So when I went back to study music and study the history of music and the performance of music, I started asking this question, is the performative the music? Does the music depend on the performative? Or have we made the performative the music? In which case I thought there was a problem there. So I started deconstructing the performative design to just see whether music survives in me. Whether Carnatic music still exists. If I just destroy the entire performance structure, is there music left? And I'm happy I found that there is music left, but I'm glad that happened. But it was a frightful experience, let me tell you that. What I don't tell you is the frightfulness of many of these things. It was frightful because the audience, of course, what is this guy doing? He's destroying tradition that has been there for so long. And they were uncomfortable. They forgot that I was uncomfortable doing it. I didn't have anything to hold on to. I didn't have all the support systems that I had built to present this art form. And suddenly I was saying, let's drop it all. and let's see what happens. It was like stripping yourself naked and standing in front of people. You just didn't know what is going to happen. That was the first time that I actually did something that was, within quotes, activisty, if you want to call it that. So it is also, I think, an artistic process to be an activist. It is part of your questioning process to be an activist. So it is not something from outside that you're attaching to your already existent profession or vocation. It is something that is automatically there. But the problem in this understanding is the way we learn art today, especially many art forms in India. It is not learnt as a questioning environment. It is not learnt in a manner to say, I can challenge notions straight here. And this is true of all, within quote, the classical traditions in the world. They're the bane, they're a bane actually in many ways. Because this whole idea of questioning doesn't exist in the way these art forms are taught. Because they believe the ultimate normative has been created by them. So when I learned music in my music class, we all knew what questions we could ask and we could not ask. We all knew we were not learning only music, we were learning so many other things through it. So when the entire learning process for what is considered an extremely creative art form is in a way very constricted and fixed, so sometimes we're fooling ourselves thinking that we are very, very free people making this free art form. And unless you bring in that challenging the status quo, which is what an activist does, into the way you learn the art form, you're never going to actually experience the art form. And so maybe somewhere it starts right in the classroom of how we sing the first notes, how we sing the first song, and how we sing even improvisational music, right? Let me say a few things about being an activist, whatever it means, and what I think are the spaces where an artist needs to explore. And I generally like to categorize it in three elements: the idea of space, people, and content. I think these three are elements where I like to work. What do I mean by space? I think we all know how space and art or art forms are intimately connected. What art form can be performed where? What art form is ideal for a certain space? Does changing the space change the art form? Does opening doors up to an art form that's never been given a proscenium stage change that art form? These are all interesting things to explore as an artist, both in my own practice of my own art form, also looking at art forms that are marginalized. So many times I've tried to challenge my status quo by pushing myself into spaces that I will not be before and see whether my art changes. Of course it changes. Of course it changes. But the other thing is to also see, what about spaces where many art forms are not allowed? They are considered to be art forms on the street. And they say they should be in the street. Of course, convenient explanations is because they are very loud. And that's where they can be heard properly. You bring them to a proscenium stage, we can't handle it. These are explanations I've heard. And there are enough counter explanations for breaking that argument. But so what can we do with space? Then the question is, who occupies which space? That's the people. What kind of people can sing Carnatic music? What kind of people can play Western classical music? What kind of attitude should they have? What kind of language should they speak? All these are largely predetermined. Largely predetermined. So those kind of questions are also very important. Is not just in my own art form in terms of, is there a diverse community participating in the art form that I pursue? And the answer is a no-brainer. It's no. And why is it no? And I've come to, we did this song called the Porambok song many years ago. And it's an interesting song for various reasons. I'm not going to go to the details. But it uses the franca lingua of the common person who speaks Tamil in Hori ragas of Carnatic music, a marriage that has never happened before. Anyway, we did it, and I think what is very interesting is when I was in a railway station one day, some person came to me who I can be sure would have never listened to Carnatic music in their life and would have never even thought that's a place that they would be allowed, permitted to come in. He tapped me and said, "Neenga thana Porambokku paattu paadninga?" He said, "You sang the Porambokku song." I said, "Yes." He said, "It was superb." Now, that was a very interesting experience. It's happened many times after that, okay? So it got me thinking on saying, many people have also made this argument about classical forms, saying that, it requires training, it requires adaptation, it requires, of course, sophistication, it takes many years of listening culture. Never asking the question why that listening culture was not offered to entire society, but that's not us. But I got more than convinced that the problem is not the music. The problem is everything that's built around the music. So when you hear anything, you're not just hearing the music. Again, about being an activist, right? You are hearing all the layers of social commentary that is happening between the sound traveling from the musician's voice and coming to you. And it's being sieved through all this. By the time it hits you, it's like, goodness gracious, I want nothing to do with these guys. Because it's oppressive. It shows an attitude of arrogance, condescension. It's already telling you that you will not understand this. So, the sound of the music, so every time we think we hear something, we actually are not hearing it. We are hearing it through so many things. And I think the activist and the artist should work on all those things that through which the music passes before it actually gets to your auditory system. And then your brain comprehends what's happening. So that's where, this is one example where I learned. The other thing is, of course, content, which I already gave an example of. Can we change the content of what we are singing, right? Can we sing about different things? Or any other art form, right? Could it be something else? Could we speak of other things? Could we change the design of the way it comes together? And I think all these things are important for both a musical conversation and a social conversation and a political conversation. Because when Arvind talked about different ideas of India, it starts at these things. It's not a global or a national phenomena. It's specific to the way we listen, the way we smell, the way we sing, what we hear, what we don't hear. And that's where you create homogeneity. The homogeneity is created at every micro level, at every cultural level, which then is built into this large monstrosity that we call nationalism, right? And it starts with sounds, smells, and colors, and songs, and tastes. And that's where it begins. So I really have never thought of these two functions as being separate. I think the meaning of art is the purpose of art, and which is why art for art's sake entirely depends on how you define art. And the purpose of art is to challenge status quo. And I want to conclude with just one comparison with democracy, which is something that I find very interesting. The thing about democracy is I think it goes against the natural, the nature of human beings. And that's why it's fascinating. The nature of human beings is to control, is to dominate, and is to hold on to, and by default oppress. And democracy challenges that very fundamental nature and says, no, that's not how we should be. Democracy is like the ethical bedrock of challenging our very instinctive nature to hold on to things, right? And which is why it's a fascinating battle, a battle that is probably never ending. And I think art in many ways does exactly the same thing. It challenges that fundamental nature of ours to look at literal things and judge literal things and hold on to literal things. And it abstracts that and says, what is the experience of life? What are the diverse experiences of life? And what are we learning from that? In a way, exploring the notion of diversity, equality, and democracy, and hopefully justice. Thank you.
Krishna, you've covered so many things. Really a fascinating talk. Um, I think I am. I think, yeah. And I'm going to allow the audience to explore, the many dimensions of all that you've raised. I'm just wondering whether I should provoke you right up front by asking a little bit more of a pointed question. Because you sent me yesterday this really nice piece that you wrote in the Telegraph called "Faith Matters," and the subheading is "Liberalism's Troubles with the Intangible." Right. So the question I have, and actually it's a question that a friend of mine who I respect a lot actually asked me to ask you, which is that. I think if you look at India today, we know about these ideas of India, and you've been very articulate in, defending a certain conception of India. But I think you are in that unique position because of your vocation and your thing that or to put it crudely, you get faith, you get religion, you get whatever, right?
I hope so.
And so the question is. One of the arguments, or one of the developments in India could be that the political developments is that that has been appropriated by one set of ideas, partly because progressives and liberals have always been very uncomfortable. Basically, as you kind of implied, they don't really get faith, religion, devotion, and all kinds of ways that they've expressed it. So the question to you is, how do you conceive of creating a politics to challenge one idea of India that goes back to having or recognizing religion, devotion, faith? And to be honest with you, when I was, I've been very influenced by Diana Eck's Sacred Geography of India as well, right? And you could argue that, in the understanding, and I'm going to say something, maybe I shouldn't, but in the understanding of the conception of India, that and Savarkar's, thing are not that different, right? I mean, in the thinking of India as a sacred geography and in all that it means, and how fundamental that is to people's quotidian lives, faith, religion, pilgrimage, everything evokes myth and fable, which are all shared amongst people. And somehow, to kind of forego that in a kind of liberal politics seems to have created a kind of vacuum that obviously has been occupied in some ways. So maybe the pointed way of asking it would be to say, when you hang out with your progressive liberal friends, how do you convince them to take this seriously?
I don't know if I'm convincing them. I keep writing and they keep writing back and saying, goodness. But yeah, I just want to take the point of, and I think the reason I'm able to articulate this in some manner is because I also practice an art form that has faith as part of it, right? And I've challenged that faith too, right? But the idea is first we have to recognize what this faith is, I will be the first to concede that any faith construction, religious construction, comes with the baggage of society, discrimination, etc. I'm placing that right in front. But faith is like this internal hope. It's something internal for a better tomorrow. It's that sensation. But there's something more to it. And it's an intangible experience that we cannot poo-poo, we cannot disregard. When a person stands before her deity, or when a person is reading a prayer, you can say that's a crutch, you can say that is just an artificial construction. These are all ways of explaining that. But is the experience not true for that individual? The experience is utterly true for that individual. The problem with the progressive conversation is we stop at saying it's a crutch. We stop at saying it is social construction. Nobody disagrees. It is messy. Nobody disagrees. But what about that experience itself? That experience is true for that individual or for that collective of people. What I think one of the biggest problems, Arvind, is we don't have a vocabulary to talk about it. And this I don't think is an Indian phenomena. I think it's a global phenomena. We don't have a progressive vocabulary on how do we talk about that profound experience. And where do we place that in our democratic progressive conversation? Where is that? That tear that somebody, there's those tears in their eyes when they experience something, how do you regard it? How do you talk about it with a condescension? And that, you must remember, is most of society. And I'm not talking about people with privilege. Talk to a villager. Or, I have this great friend called Palain, who's a fisher. You speak to Palain Anna. He's deeply religious. But he's religious to not just Hindu gods, he's religious to all gods. He doesn't understand atheism. And in that article I quote him and I say, if you ask Palinana, if you say somebody is atheistic, Palinana will say, ask them to come out to the seas with me and they'll get theistic. And it's a fascinating statement that he makes. And like I say in the piece, it's not just about the fear of being in the wilds. There is something else in that expanse that he feels. He smells. And that gives him a larger feeling of something. Now, I may not comprehend it, I may not even believe in it, but I have to understand that is a real experience. And that, in a way, centers Palinanna. It gives him a centering. The question for us is, how do we navigate, how do we first create a vocabulary to understand, not even understand it, shall we talk, more than talk, listen, probably. And how do we, along with that, have a conversation about gender, about caste, about race and color? Because if you're going to say this entire thing is constructed on all these horrible things that we have constructed, so the only way to get rid of it is to say this is nonsense, then we are actually disregarding life experience. And to me, that is a problem. That is a serious problem. And I don't agree with Sarvakar because he doesn't respect these multiple ways of experiencing. He thinks there's only one way of experiencing. So he's actually no different in many ways to the person on the other end of the spectrum who says there is no experience. Saying no experience is equal to saying there's only one experience. It's no different, right? When you say there's no experience, that is an experience. So you're just saying the same thing in different ways. So I think that is and I think we have to work fast on this. We don't have time. We don't have time. We have to talk about this. So I think what is very beautiful about India is the fact that in the way, despite every mess that we have created among ourselves, there has been so many ways that people are touched by this. And this is true of the world, but I can only speak for India. They're touched by this. And there is kindness that sometimes is born from there. So where is that kindness coming from? There is violence too, but there's violence also from the other side, even if you don't believe there's violence. But there is also kindness coming from it. So is that providing an avenue for that kindness? How are we going to respect that and say, we can't disregard these profound experiences and say that is the secular, progressive, liberal way of looking, and in a way that's so illiberal. And I think that's our problem.
Yeah, but Krishna, great response. But those experiences are not just individual, but profoundly collective.
Of course. When I speak about Palain, it's not just his individual. It happens from his community. It happens from the fact that he lived in a certain environment. It's collective experiences. So through my art, I can challenge them, channel in the model, but at the same time, I'm also experiencing it. I may not believe in a deity, but there is something profound that still happens. What is that? And and we all know it exists. That's the whole thing. We all know it exists. It could be a walk for you in the mountains. It could be anything, but it could also be a god. It could also be a ritual. It could be a little thing you do every morning. Lighting a lamp. What does it mean? You want to call it a cultural practice, religious practice, spiritual practice. Use what word you want. Yeah? I think that's the challenge, and that's an important space that we need to get into and have those conversations.
Any concrete ideas?
Well, I think there is. I mean, I use my music in many ways to get into that space. Because many people have asked me this question saying, you talk about having different content, why do you sing Tyagaraja? Saying, no, I will sing Tyagaraja. I will sing Dikshitar because Tyagaraja is still profound to me. And to me, it's to allow, in my music, what I try and think about is, suppose I allow diversity of meaning in the way I sing. And if there are different kinds of profounds that are happening during that concert, both from a song about manual scavenging and a song about Rama, then there is an interesting conversation. There is a musical vocabulary there. And that person comes and says, how did this happen? How did this happen to me? Why am I, something I never thought will happen is happening. So then the secular or the social or the very, very complicated is in a way having a conversation with something that is deeply religious, not just religious, it's mythical, it has mythology, it has baggage, and these two are kind of coming into conversation with each other. What will emerge from it is not under my control. I can only allow for that to play out. So we have to create that complexity between faith, religion, culture, social discrimination. We have to allow them to actually bounce off each other. And each one has to be able to navigate some way through it. We can't separate them, keep them in silos and say, this I'll embrace, that needs to get out. And that has to stop.
Wonderful. Let me throw the floor open to questions. I'm sure many people want to ask many questions. I saw... okay, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful lecture. I want to go back to a point you made today, which connects to what you said yesterday, about the distinction between what it is for an artist to be actively political and what is political about art inherently itself. And I think the answer you gave us today is that, at least in the way I understood it, is that art has the ability to complicate the literal via its ability to abstract. And I also think you took us a step further at the end of today's lecture when you said that it's also a political act to be moved.
Yes.
Reception itself is political. And so I wanted to ask you if you thought, as in what you thought was specifically the political potential of music. Is the relation between being moved by music, or the relation between music and reception different?
Music and?
The reception of music, or the ability to be moved by music, different from the ability to be moved by another art form?
Okay, so the thing about music, I mean, I know many philosophers have always placed music separately in many ways. I'm comfortable and uncomfortable with that placement. I think it comes from one intrinsic quality about music, is that you can't hold it in your hands. Yeah. You can't keep seeing it. It's intangible. And that's what makes it, in a way, automatically separated from the literal. A dance is on somebody's body. There is a physicality to it. A painting is on something. Plastic arts are physical. There's a physicality to all other art forms. Here, though there's a person playing it, the sound itself is woof, comes and goes. And the amazing thing, it goes but still stays, right? Yeah. That's the magic. Yeah. That's the magic of music. It comes in as sound and you can't hold it, and then the song is over, but the song remains. Maybe that's both its advantage and disadvantage. The disadvantage is you can make it mythical very fast because of that. And which is why you can use music also for the worst things. Yeah. Right? Absolutely. Because that will stay. Which also means it has the potential to seed things in your mind. Which is why, for example, the songs that you learn in a school, you never forget in your life. You never forget those songs. At least the tune you'll hum. At some point of time in the shower, you'll hum it. Why? You may not know the words. Right? So, to your question, suppose we sing songs that are political. We teach songs that can challenge these status quos. Then are we teaching ethical values without actually telling people that we're teaching them? It's one thing I want to say here. Sorry, I'm just digressing. The other big problem with progressive left is their only understanding of art is protest art.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to put that out. I completely forgot about saying that. That's a big problem. You say art and they want some janda and they want somebody shouting some slogans. No. What about traditional art forms?
Yeah.
What is your conversation with traditional art forms? Are you going to say they're all casteist, they're all racially discriminative, discard? No. Every art form need not be a literal challenge to a political situation. The question is, can we discuss the design of it?
Yeah.
Go back to its aesthetic form and say, can there be a different conversation in it? That's what we should be doing. So we should.
That is the political.
That is, in fact, far more the interesting political for me.
Yeah.
Because I've done both. I've sung the political song directly. I know what it means, and it's important, and that needs a place, and you need to do it in a certain place. You have to respond, you just have to. But you just cannot only be doing that and thinking that's the only way art can be political. That's a problem.
Yeah.
A sound is political. Right? So, and to that point, it's even simple idea of, I just want to address I just want to give you an example. I'm sorry. So, as an example, I use a lot because I'm still fascinated by what happened to me. So, this is an art form called Koothu. With the art form, we do a collaborative idea called Carnatic Koothu. And it's an interesting experiment because it's about two art forms that occupy very different positions in society. And with this great artist called Rajagopal, and we've done one production, we have traveled quite a bit with it, pre-COVID. And you can actually see clips on YouTube if you want to. And
Can you explain Koothu?
so Koothu is a kind of a sacral art form, mainly practiced in Tamil Nadu in certain segments and also in Andhra, in Telugu-speaking regions. You could say it's close cousins with Yakshagana of Karnataka, those kind of art forms. You could say they're close cousins. Now, the first time I heard Koothu, everything that the people in Koothu sang was noise to me. In my ears, it was noisy. And I'm not even exaggerating. But politically, I was in a different place. Right? So there is this big problem you face. It's like, first, is it noise? It's noise. But then there's a political and social conversation here, and they don't match with this. So there's actually internal disturbance because of my privilege. Because of the fact that again, like I said before, you never really listen, right? I'm not listening. But the incredible thing that happened to me in 8 months of working together is 8 months later, the same song was music. Okay, the scientists will say these are about neural pathways, about, neural pathways being, learning happening. I agree. But where I disagree is the neural pathways will make me recognize the pattern, but I need cognition for me to call it music. So that's why I disagree with the scientist on this, and I'm sure they still disagree with me. But so where did that cognition come? When did noise become music? Not just a pattern that I recognize. This goes back to your question about music and about the politics of it. This is political. So if you can change the way people listen, you're changing society. If people hear music in places they never heard music, then you're creating a larger and a multiplicity idea of India. That's exactly what you're doing. So you don't need to always do it directly.
Yeah.
You can sometimes just do it by letting it be. And sometimes you can have different conversations. So I think my long-winded answer to you is, yes, I think there is something interesting about music because it's intangible. It's its great advantage. But we have to be very careful with it and not get stuck with the literal or not get stuck with the mystical. Both those positions can drive us to a dead end.
I'd rather if students or
Go ahead, please go ahead. Use the mic, please.
It has to go to one. It has to go to one.
This is sort of on a different line, but how do you cope with the fact that, or what is your response, to the idea that no matter how much for you your music, you want it to mean something that is, you want it to convey a message, you want it to convey a meaning. But for a lot, or no, maybe perhaps not a lot, but for a significant proportion of the people who listen to your music, you know, for them, they look at it solely as something, that sounds good to them. There are definitely a lot of people who listen to your music, every morning they probably get up and they put on TM Krishna or some, like a Vatapi Ganapatim or something. They're like, oh, ho, aha, so good. And they carry on with their life, you know. And that is what that is to them. It is a good start to their morning, and they go on and, they live their own life. So is that something that you just accept as an artist, that, for a big proportion of your listeners, they might not get from your music what you want them to get from your music? And does that in any way come in the way of the goals you have?
So I don't have any goals. So I'll start with that. I just want to complicate my life. My job is there is a certain, in everything that you do, there's something about yourself in it. Okay? And I'm not saying it in a manner of selfishness in that way, but I think you are also trying to look at yourself in different ways, right? So, yes, there could be people who do exactly what you're saying. I don't have control over that. But I just keep doing one thing. Can I complicate that experience of my music in whatever manner that I can? Because I'm complicating my own experience, right? So I'll keep doing things that push different things. They may, of course, like you said, choose to discard certain things and choose to take something. I don't have control over it. And I can't do anything about it. But I can then sing a Vatapi that makes a different meaning to them. And it's like, what is happening here? They may still go back to the old one. But at least I've dropped a little seed. Well, I must tell you, a lot of people have stopped listening to me. It's true. It's utterly true. There is a lot of people. I've got emails. Now they stopped sending me those emails, but they used to send me emails. I've thrown all your CDs into the dustbin. I don't listen. I mean, there are people who've done that too. Of course, there are people who have come from the other way, other side, and said, now I listen to you, I never listened to you before. But I'm saying, you don't have control over that, right? I mean, how can I decide that? There are people who choose to only pick certain things of my work and only stick to that part of my work and try to say, like his mother said, genius certain ways, but slightly off in certain ways. So let the offside be taken away. I mean, who am I to take care of it? But I make all the effort possible. When I make music, and not when I speak or write, so I'm just making music, can we complicate that experience of that music? And I have gone, sometimes going back complicated with the experience, and what happened here today? That's all I can do. Beyond that, I can't do much.
So you've made peace with the fact that
I was never disturbed by it for the first time. So I was never disturbed by it. I just accepted it. But I must say that even those people, after a point of time, are forced, in a way, to engage with something or the other. Right? I mean, when we did the Porambokka song, the most classical musician was sitting and listening to it and wondering what was going on here. That's important. And if that triggered other people to try many other experiments beyond what we did, which is even better, right? And I also think there's another generation of people listening to us.
Great. Please, I'll come to you in a second. Yeah, sure, please.
Thank you so much for this talk.
I think you should use the mic.
I forgot there's an audience out there. I think one of the things that I've heard sort of come out in your remarks is sort of thinking a lot about the artist, right? And sort of what is the artist's role, what is art? But I want to ask more about the audience, because it seems like part of what the conundrum that, right, you're facing in your own work, but just more broadly for folks out there who are trying to think about legacies of casteism in the so-called classical arts is what is the purpose of art? And from the perspective of the audience. And the word that keeps coming to my mind, even though I've heard the word experience, is also the word pleasure. It seems that so much of the disappointment that people express, right, in talking about, I came to see you sing a bhajan and you're, singing about manual scavenging, is this kind of failure to be pleased by the performer. And to me, I think about, I'm not an expert, but I think about just the kind of long histories of at least dance and music, right, that are tied to patronage systems, that are also tied to the sort of pleasures of
Important,
elites.
yeah.
And so I wonder how you think about not just the concept of pleasure in your own work, but how to kind of bring politics to people who are coming to you not necessarily expecting to sort of think, but to feel.
Well, the construction of pleasure itself is created by a certain power structure.
Absolutely.
Right? So in a way, when they expect the pleasure, they're also participating in that power structure. Now, it's a good question because it's a challenge for an artist. Let me, look in the audience. And to be honest, look at myself. I mean, I started singing when I was 12 years old, but professionally when I was 15. And for a near decade plus, I delivered pleasure, right? I did. And the thing is this. I think many artists struggle with challenging that point because they're scared that they will lose their audience. I'm starting with a very, very brass tacks basic problem. Do I want to take the chance of, changing things that tomorrow I don't have an audience? Because finally, artists love to sing to an audience. Let's be very clear. And the audience, and there is that transactional relationship of providing that pleasure and the applause and whatever comes with it, right? So, many artists would say, no, I just want to continue with that delivery of pleasure. And at some level, I can understand it, right? And you could make the argument of saying, why should there be discomfort at all in that, right? This goes back to the idea of the performance and the art. And I think they are different things. And I think the problem is many times, both the audience trained by the artist, the audience presumes the performance is the art. Performance can be one way of expressing the art. There could be different kinds of performances. If you can create a variable in the idea of the performance or the performative, then we could have different ideas of the pleasurable. And displeasure can be part of it. Anish Kapoor, my dear friend who did the Chicago Bean, said something to me many years ago, which I use a lot. We were talking about cinema, and he said, the thing I miss in cinema now is boredom. And I think that's in a way linked to what we are discussing today, right? So we should ask that question of saying, is discomfort and displeasure a part of the experience of any art form? Can we turn that on its head and say that is in fact essentially also part of the experience? Then we are asking an interesting question, right? And if we accept that it is, then this issue changes. But if you say no, this is not part of what an artist should be doing, then the audience is not going to like it, right? They're not going to do it. So in my own practice, I think maybe the audience has gotten used to it, maybe. And also there is power. I'm a powerful man. I didn't do it when I was a nobody, let's be very clear. I did all that stuff I did after I got into a position of power where I knew I didn't care about the system anymore. So there is power there too. And that's the whole problem, this little trap within a trap. You're speaking about power, but you are in a position of power to speak about power. Right? I'm in a position of power to deconstruct the power. Right? So there is no easy answer to that conundrum. But I think if we can change the experience of art or the understanding of experience of art, even if they don't think, if they can feel different things, then maybe this whole relationship between the artist, the performing artist especially, because some way we are willing to accept it in, say, visual art. Because we can just not look at the painting. Right? But in a performing art form, because there is this entire 2-hour experience that is mutually being experienced, the understanding of experience was also different. Unless it's predetermined, like saying this is a political rally, or saying this is, unless you've already defined it. If you've not defined it in manner, then your problem arises both for the audience and for the artist. And there is fear in the artist. Let's be very, very clear. You are scared. You are scared. I was scared. I did think at one point of time I will lose all the audience I had. It was a real existential question. It's not an easy one to deal with, right? I could just be forgotten in a year's time. What do I do with my life? So it is a very difficult question. So my advice to many times to younger artists is say, you first get your art form together, get the organization of the art form together. Have your thoughts working, but you also need to be smart about it. Maybe that's also privilege. An art form which is marginalized, does that person have the luxury to wait? See, everything I'm saying has another side to it, right? That artist has to do it now. If an art community or somebody in the art form has been marginalized for generations and they have to make the point today, they can't wait for a moment to make the point. I can wait to a moment. So it is partly a very practical life situation. It is also a philosophical question. And I think each one needs to find a way to navigate that. And hopefully artists like me can provide some support from behind and say, think about this. These are the systems that you have. And also, people say, choose your battles. I've never understood that phrase. How do we choose our battles? Which battle is to be chosen? This sounds so nice to say, but how do you choose it? We don't know. So these are all tough ones. That's a tough one.
So I was going to ask partially about what you started to address in your answer to the previous question, but I sort of have a two-part question. The first part is, when we're speaking about, especially pertaining to some of what you said yesterday, when we're speaking about, we're in a position of power, people who are already Carnatic musicians, who are already giving performances, speaking up about these issues, say casteism, having more performers, having, the marginalized communities whose Carnatic music originated from. How do those people even get involved in the scene of activism?
Who just define the people again?
Oh, sorry. The people who are marginalized.
Who are marginalized, yes.
How do those people actually get involved if there's all of these very uncomfortable realities and obstacles for them to overcome before they are, they've sort of transcended in some way their social position and become recognized as a performing artist?
Can I add to this?
Yeah, please.
Is there a form of music which is as closely identified with the marginalized in India as, for example, historically jazz and blues have been in America?
No, of course
they
there is.
represent black suffering.
Yeah.
They emerged out of black suffering. So could you say something about, I think it's connected to what you're saying?
Slightly, but he's talking about the power music,
Okay,
but I got to your point. I can reflect on both. There are multiple, by the way. In my own state, there's Ghana. It's called Ghana. It emerged from migrant workers who moved to the city of Chennai. It's an art form that represents the Dalit population of North Chennai. There are Parayatam. It's a dance form that again represents the marginalized sections of society. You have many more. Even the whole idea of Oppari, which is sung during funerals, is mainly by many marginalized communities. So there are multiple art forms where the content, in Ghana, they sing about exactly suffering. They think about the police violence. They sing about all that. They're fascinating art forms. Actually, I've done a little work on Ghana, not so much, but the structuring of the art form is also very interesting and intriguing to think about. On why certain art forms structure in certain manner. What is the commonality, for example, of art forms that come from margins in various parts of the world? These are all interesting things to ponder about. And they also tell you many things politically and socially regarding rhythm, regarding tunes, regarding, if you look at most marginalized art forms, they are very strong on the rhythmic base, on the rhythmic structure. And that tells you something about the body, something about movement, and something about making it obvious to the rest of the world that's not listening to them. Saying, listen to our suffering, listen to our difficulty. And that's common. You find that thread in many places. So there's a lot to that. So there are many art forms. And in India, of course, there are multiple. Now, of course, hip-hop and rap is also being adopted. And there are these combinations of rap and Ghana that come together. For example, there's a wonderful artist called Arivu, who does both rap, Ghana all together. Tamil rap and he does Tamil Ghana together. And there are many things. You can go, there are art forms that have come out from tribal art forms. There are also there with Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh and many other places. Younger generation of people are doing some very interesting work using these multiple sounds in India. So there's been traditionally and there are also contemporary. Yes, yes, it's happening in many places. So one thing is, it is not always an old sound that is being created for now, but there are new sounds also being created today that represents the suffering of the marginalized. Yes. Now to your question, that is such a difficult question to answer, and should I be answering that question?
I think that's also part of the question.
That's also part of the problem.
Can we answer?
But it's also part of the problem. Can we
are?
Exactly? Can we even address that question? Who are we to address that question? I can only address it as an observer, and my observation could be wrong, and I'll be happy to be corrected by anybody who has had a different life experience because of that. It is very difficult for them to even be asking these questions. That's the reality. And if one of them asks that question, then their participation can be forgotten. Now, I can survive because of who I am, very simply put. I have the privilege to survive, right? They can't ask this question. It's not just true of Carnatic music, it's as true of Hindustani music. I would love to see one Muslim musician come up and say, I don't believe in Rama. He would never do it. He would never do it. So Hindustani music runs away from this argument by saying we don't sing on Rama and Krishna. But this underlying notion of Hindu spiritualism is always hovering around it. Nada. We all have to talk about those things. Not talk about it, keep quiet, accept it. Right? So I think it is very difficult for a person from the margins to speak about this. I know people from the margins who have made it in some of these art forms, and some people even do not know their identity, where they came from. That's also true. They have been forced to kind of keep it under wraps. Right? That is also true. That also happens. So it's a very difficult situation. I think the best you can do, like we try to do, is be an ally. And try and provide spaces where maybe they can have different conversations on their own terms about it. That's the best you can do. But I agree with you that it's very hard. But I do think again that compared to 10 years ago, we are at least in a point where these conversations are happening. So maybe more spaces will start opening. Maybe younger people who until now have never spoken will say something, and I have seen some indications of it. They're good indications, but it's a long haul.
Krishna, so sorry, I think, I want to have one, do you want to ask you? Happy. So, but I think that it would be almost, it would be inappropriate and I think a letdown if we didn't end with you singing exactly that art advocacy, the what do you say?
Porambok.
I think really fitting way to end this. This is the protest thing that Krishna was being recognized all over for. So just even a snatch of it, and then we'll end on that note. Yeah, just as long as you can. Up to you, yeah, whatever you. I think that would be the most fitting way to end it.
No, so the Porambok song does many interesting things. You can see it with the video. It's far more powerful with the video because it gives you the context of where the location of what it was. It's about environmental degradation. It is about pollution. It's also about the marginalization of the people who live there, and it's also about this crazy idea of India that we are building. And in fact, the song kind of teases on the word "Make in India." At some point. So it was about this issue in North Chennai where power plants were still creating havoc with all the pollution, with all the fly ash that is dumped. 1,000 acres has been occupied by the fly ash, and river has been destroyed, and the life of the fisher folk is very, very hard. So we released this song some years ago. I'll sing snatches of it, and the interesting thing is, it in a way addresses many questions that you brought up, because it is in the language that I would never sing in Carnatic music. It's a language that an auto driver would speak to me every day. And this is something the classical arts across the world don't do, is to, rather so-called classical arts, is to use the language that the common person of that era does. They will use the language of the common person of a different era and then say we're Catholic. And that's, of course, a blatant lie. So I'm just going to use the phone for, yeah, okay. So the song is written by a Tamil rock musician. His name was Kebar Vasuki. He now lives in Canada. It was originally actually a Tamil rock song. You can hear that version too online. So it's probably the first Carnatic song that was taken as a rip-off from a rock song. So maybe that's a first too in many ways, right? So it's a cover in some manner. But it was tuned by a friend of mine, and it's tuned in what would be considered very classical ragas. A bit of a holy grail thing. So, for those who don't know Tamil, maybe I'll just give you the context. So the meaning starts with Porambokku Onakilla, Porambokku Yanakilla, Porambokku Urukku, Porambokku Bhumikku. So Porambokku is an interesting word. It's actually an abuse word. It means good for nothing, useless. But it became an abuse word because for a very, very practical reason. So when the Brits were in India, of course, land revenue was very important. And if Arvind owned a home, they would get revenue from taxing you. But the commons is where they never got tax. So the marshland, the forest, the river, the lakes were all commons. So what they basically did is, this is the commons, so it's useless. And the commons in Tamil is called Porambokku. So Porambokku became useless, which meant it was good for nothing, which meant the people who live there are also good for nothing. Which means that the entire space becomes something you can pollute, you can marginalize, you can abuse, you can violate. So this song plays with that word. So it says, Porambokku Onakilla. It doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the people. It belongs to the land. And then because it's in Chennai, we go on to talk about the floods in Chennai and say there was a time when cities were built around rivers. Rivers didn't flow within cities. And directly about this place, Ennur, where this is happening, see that we have partitioned the place. We have stopped the river from joining the sea. And people have taken away your lands. And I'm just giving you, of course, just the gist. You can watch the entire thing on YouTube. Finally, we talk about this idea of Make in India. He says, if you go and ask this guy, what have you done to me? He will say, no, this is all about Make in India.
So maybe I can use it in my next piece criticizing Atmanirbharta.
Please do. It completely comes through in it. So we talk about Make in India being a way by which you can escape. And finally, the song ends by saying, they tell you that it's about giving you jobs, etc., but it's all a lie. The person who's taken the land has just taken it for himself. And it ends by saying, you are a Porambokku and I'm a Porambokku. That's how it ends. So I'm just going to maybe not sing it completely, but sing portions of it. Porambokku unakku illa, Porambokku enakku illa, Porambokku oorukku, Porambokku bhoomikku, Porambokku unakku illa, Porambokku enakku illa, Porambokku oorukku, Porambokku bhoomikku, Porambokku un பொறுப்பு, Porambokku en பொறுப்பு, Porambokku ஊர் பொறுப்பு, இயற்கைக்கு பூமிக்கு, Porambokku உனக்கு இல்ல, Porambokku எனக்கு இல்ல, புறம்போக்கு ஊருக்கு புறம்போக்கு பூமிக்கு புறம்போக்கு உன் பொறுப்பு புறம்போக்கு என் பொறுப்பு புறம்போக்கு ஊர் பொறுப்பு இயற்கைக்கு பூமிக்கு சாமகாரி கமப சானி சாமகாரி சாபதனி தபதமாமகரி சாக வெள்ளம் வந்து போன பின்ன கத்துட்டது என்ன வெள்ளம் வந்து போன பின்ன கத்துட்டது என்ன ஏரிக்குள்ள கட்டடத்த கட்டுறது என்ன வெள்ளம் வந்து போன பின்ன கத்துட்டது என்ன ஏரிக்குள்ள கட்டடத்த கட்டுறது என்ன மழை தண்ணி கடலுக்கு வழிற இடத்துல கான்கிரீட் கட்டடம் தேவையா கண்ணு சாணி பதவ சசகாரி மாக பாமதவ சாமக பாமத பமபகாமரி சபமத முன்னே நகரத்துக்குள்ள நதிகளோடல முன்னே நகரத்துக்குள்ள நதிகளோடல உன்ன நகரத்துக்குள்ள நதிகள் ஓடல நதிகள் சுத்திதான் நகரம் வளர்ந்துச்சு மழை தண்ணிய காத்திருதையருக்கு புறம்போக்குன்னு பேரு இருந்துச்சு புறம்போக்குன்னு பேரு இருந்துச்சு புறம்போக்குன்னு பேரு இருந்துச்சு. I'll stop here.
Fabulous. Krishna, on behalf of the Watson Center, Saxena Center at Watson, Ashu, everyone here, thank you for what a treat, amazing over the between yesterday and today. It was just a absolute treat. I mean, I cannot tell you in so many ways. And thank you to the audience. Thank you to whoever's watching online. But above all, thanks, Krishna, for coming and really enriching our lives.
We can have a reception for 15 minutes or so. We're ending a little late, so yeah. Should you wish to chat?
We had before.
Huh?
We had before.
Sorry?
The reception was before.
Before? Okay, it's the.
It's already done.
Oh, it's already done. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm organizationally off. I'm organizationally off.